Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Peter Lynagh. Peter is the founder of Able Academy, a peer-to-peer learning group in which like-minded business people come together in a facilitated, confidential environment to share ideas and give and take advice. What's unique about Peter is how he draws from his corporate background and extensive professional network to create an environment where business issues are shared, discussed, and resolved between the group's members. And be sure to listen to the end, where Peter shares with us why he thinks having peers to hold you accountable is one of the greatest motivators to being more productive. So whether you're interested in knowing more about peer-to-peer learning, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Peter Lynagh, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Peter, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, I'm a big fan of peer-to-peer learning, and I'm sure that our listeners can learn a lot from your expertise in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So, Peter, where did you grow up?
Amir, I was born and bred in Hammersmith, West London.
All right. And what did you study after secondary school?
Chemistry.
Okay, was that at university?
It was at Polytechnic.
Oh, wow, fantastic. And is that what took you to your sort of career before setting up your business?
Well, I started as a chemist at a company called Sericol, who developed printing ink. And to be honest, it was they that had the program of putting selected individuals through university and polytechnic courses. So I studied chemistry as a sandwich course with them, and that led me to the position of being a chemist developing UV curable printing inks.
Oh, wow, that sounds fascinating. And could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
Yeah, well, from Sericol, I realised in my early 20s that working at a bench in the laboratory was not going to be my career till 65. So I started to look for other roles, and I was lucky enough to be hired by an American chemical company that made coatings, and that essentially continued my career in the chemical industry, specialising in the coatings field. I moved from there to an American outfit that were eventually acquired by a company called Morton, who developed the booster rockets for the shuttle program.
Wow.
I was involved in their specialty chemicals group in Europe. From there, I joined a Japanese-American joint venture, again making coatings for the automotive industry. I was like Honda and Toyota and Nissan in the UK. And then from there, I took a little bit of a different step. I went back to my earlier chemistry career and went into raw materials and joined a chemical distribution business. They too were acquired by another bigger Swiss operation. So my last role was CEO of a chemical distribution business, which I left in 2009 after 40 years in the chemical industry.
Wow, that sounds really interesting, Peter. So, Peter, bringing this conversation to the present, could you tell us a little bit about your business today?
I founded the Academy of Business Leaders and Entrepreneurs now nearly 8 years ago, which really evolved from me leaving my last CEO role that I mentioned earlier on, back in 2009. I'd spent over 40 years in the chemical industry, and I just got to the point where I'd been in it far too long. So I decided to do something different. To be honest, I didn't know what to do. That's where the link with the Kingston Chamber of Commerce came in. I joined them, and they were really great in supporting me in setting up my consultancy to begin with. But I'd been involved with a peer-to-peer group 20 years ago in one of my chemical distribution days. And it was a process that I thoroughly enjoyed and fell in love with and became a member. And then when I left my last role, I was quite fortunately contacted by the individual that chaired the group that I was in from 10 years earlier. And he introduced me to the owner of the model, and they offered me a license to take up a group and develop a group in the South London area. And that's what I did for 2 years. But unfortunately, they were bought out, and the new owners were very interested in making money. My values was actually providing value. So I decided that I would set up my own version. That led me to founding the Academy of Business Leaders and Entrepreneurs.
It's really interesting.
Now 8 years ago.
Now, Peter, for the benefit of our listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with the concept, could you explain what peer-to-peer learning is and sort of briefly talk us through how it takes place under your model, for example?
Okay. Well, essentially, it's bringing together a group of like-minded CEOs, business owners that are in a non-competing business environment and offering them a very confidential and private forum where we can be very open with each other, because the challenge here is that we work together as a group to help support and develop both them as individuals as well as their companies. And the process really evolves around getting together once a month, although recently we've been doing this over Zoom. And to operate Zoom for a full day is a little bit of a challenge. So we've split that into 2 half days. And the first half day is an international speaker workshop. And the essence of this is that the speaker is at the leading edge of their particular discipline. And it's extremely engaging, where we engage all the members, so much so that my speakers actually say that they've learnt from the session as well. And that will go on for about 3 hours. Then we have our second session 2 weeks later, and that's when we cover off what we call my Able Clinic. And that is covering accountability. What have you done that you promised you would do last month? And we go around the room and challenge people on why they haven't done what they've done, etc. And then we get into the core of the Able Clinic, which is covering off dilemmas, opportunities, and challenges that they have. And again, that's in a very, very private environment. What is said and done stays in the room. And it's very constructive, because this isn't a love-in where it's all nicey, kissy. This can be quite brutal in the sense that people are going to be challenged on what they're trying to do. But it is all for the benefit of helping them grow both individually and both their company. And then another part of the month, I'm involved in a one-to-one coaching session with my members as well. So that essentially is the difference. I run 2 groups at the moment. One is my CEO group, which tends to be for the bigger companies. My other group is the Able Leaders Group, which tends to be the smaller companies or board directors from either my CEO group or other companies. Essentially, they're learning on their journey to become CEOs.
That's really interesting, Peter. And what are some of the benefits that you've seen your members get from these meetings and from this structure?
Well, some recent benefits, for instance, are that one of my members was unsure about whether they should go ahead with a potential aggressive buyout from another organisation. And we were able to help them through the issues and challenges they had. And the strange thing that came out of this, and obviously I can't mention names for confidentiality reasons, one of the members actually merged with that particular company rather than that company going ahead with the aggressive takeover. So that's one benefit. Another benefit, and this was a local Kingston business, where we were able to help him develop his business in the sense of making it saleable, because it was very much a one-man band, and we were able to take him through all the processes needed, and he made a successful sale of the business at a price that was substantially higher than what he expected, and that was through the support of the group. They were just really two examples. There are many, many more examples.
That's interesting. Peter, I can imagine that folks listening to us right now have perhaps been exposed to, say, a peer-to-peer framework such as a Chambers of Commerce type environment, or maybe they're part of a study group that perhaps has an element of peer-to-peer learning. I'm just wondering if there are sort of one or two tips that you could share with our listeners who perhaps would be interested in setting up a small peer-to-peer learning group of their own.
Okay, I think the key tip is that if you're going to do it on your own from scratch, is to really start off with a blank sheet of paper and start to question, what is my purpose for doing this? As part of my coaching program, I do a strategy on a page, which is really developing the purpose, the passion, the values, the company promise and market segment, as well as your strategy, etc. Really go back to the basics of why you want to do this, what is driving you to do this. In my own case, as an example, the reason I wanted to do this is I had such a fabulous experience being part of a group and learning from that I just wanted to pass that on to other people. So it is essentially a better idea to have experience of being a member of a group rather than starting off totally scratch, so that you at least get some experience on how to do it. But really, you need to be very, very clear on your purpose, passion, and values, why you want to do that.
Peter, that's really interesting. And you've now mentioned the word accountability a few times, and that's definitely a thread I want to pull further with you, because to me, what peer-to-peer learning offers that perhaps executive coaching, say, doesn't, is this idea of accountability between the members of a group. So could you share with us perhaps why you think this is such a powerful feature of a peer-to-peer learning environment?
Okay, well, I think I could illustrate that best by quoting one of my members who, as part of his testimonial, said that being a member of ABLE was like having 10 non-executive directors or NEDs around the table. And I think the core thing here is that although I do coach my members, the added benefit is that you've got a table of at least 10, perhaps a dozen others that are actually coaching you as well. And they come from diverse backgrounds, diverse experience. And it's just pooling that resource of many, many other individuals in an environment where it is very confidential, but supportive and constructive. So I guess the main benefit is that you're getting a wealth of coaching experience from a number of different people, not just one individual.
Yeah, that's super powerful to me and very appealing. Peter, for the folks listening to us who perhaps would like to get a taster of what peer-to-peer learning is all about, what are the steps for them to perhaps get to know a bit more about this through you?
Okay, well, the first step would be please do contact me. My email address is peter@able-academy.com. You're very welcome to phone me on my mobile, which is 07711 669 363. My avatar for potential members is CEO, business owner, or board director of a company of at least £500,000 turnover that's been going at least 5 years. And if that is the case, do call me. And if you're happy with what I've got to say and I'm happy, then that will lead to an invite to a taster event. And currently we're doing this on Zoom. That taster event will be subject to a small charge, but will involve a half-day session with our speaker, who's an international speaker at the leading edge of their discipline. And the second half will be 2 weeks later. And that again is just under 3 hours, where we cover accountability and the ABLE clinic. Then at the end of that session, I have a follow-up call with you. And if everything's looking good, we then look at you coming along and joining us on an introductory quarter basis, where you join us for 3 consecutive meetings, monthly meetings, and 3 consecutive one-to-one coaching sessions with me. And then again, if everything is good and the individual is happy and we're happy, then that's when I can confirm membership. And if I may add, one of the key things about ABLE is the Joshua Lynagh Foundation, which is a charity I set up following the loss of my grandson, Joshua, years ago. So when a new member joins, so make them aware that we will donate to a charity of their particular choosing as well. Is a method of us giving back in terms of the ABLE model.
That's fantastic, Peter. Peter, what are some of the key business lessons that you've learned throughout your life?
Well, I think the biggest business lesson I learned, Amir, is that when I was in the chemical industry, we have 4 children that are now adults, but in their early days, I was working for an American company and it involved a hell of a lot of travel. I used to have an east-west or west-east ticket to go around the world to our various locations. And I was not around for my family. My wife was left to bring up my children. And one particular occasion, I arrived home and I put the key in the door. I was away about 7 months. My young son, Daniel, was running to the door and stopped and ran back to Mum and said, "Mum, who's that stranger at the door?" And that's when it really hit me hard that I hadn't watched being part of my children growing up. So for your listeners, I would say whatever you do in business, make sure you spend time with your children. Don't put your business first, even though business is important. So that, I think, was a key lesson for me. And after that, I told my boss I wasn't prepared to do it, and we came to an arrangement. I ceased to do it. And I then was able to spend time with my kids. But a little later in life, I've missed out on that important part of their growing up process.
That's a really valuable and important lesson, Peter. I appreciate you sharing that with us. When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
Well, I think, without being too obvious, Amir, it's setting up my own business 10 years ago. Over the years of working for other people and growing businesses for other people, I always wanted to have my own business, but either I didn't have the opportunity or the money or an idea of what I wanted to do. And by default, later in my life, 58 years of age, I was given the opportunity, and that's where I am today. So I would say, without doubt, setting up my own business, because there is no way that I could ever work for someone else now.
And what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline you can tell us about?
Well, I think the key thing for me, Amir, is that with the relationship with my foundation, the Joshua Lynagh Foundation, I mentioned ABLE is linked to this. What we're doing is at the end of the year, part of my profits will go to the foundation. It really is, since doing this, it's really grabbed me that the bigger ABLE becomes, the more we can donate to the foundation. So there's a number of areas now that I'm looking to develop ABLE. There are a few people that have approached me that are interested in joining chairs to take my model under license. I'm also looking at it as a white label version for a number of institutions that I'm part of. So it's very much growing ABLE, but very much bearing in mind of giving back and developing the Joshua Lynagh Foundation, because I think today it's really a key thing for people to actually give back in terms. And I think a lot of companies now are definitely looking at this and what they can do, give back to the local community or to good causes, and that I'm really a strong believer in. So when I do eventually retire, and perhaps have sold ABLE on, and I'm sure part of the profits will go to the foundation, I hope, God willing, with my health, that I will be able to continue supporting and being involved with the Joshua Lynagh Foundation.
That's a great cause, Peter, and sounds like it's exciting times ahead.
Yes, I'd like to think so, and I'm really looking forward to it, Amir. And may I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my journey and my future vision with you and the audience.
No worries. So far, it's been my pleasure. As we start to wrap up, Peter, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Peter, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Well, corny as it may seem, it's gardening, which I've found so relaxing. But it's also sport, although I've got to say at my age, it's now no longer playing. But yeah, my two passions at the moment are gardening and sport.
Are there any books that you've recently read that you would recommend to our listeners?
Interesting question, because one of the books that really does come to mind, and I've reread it again recently, is a book called The Little Book of Winning, that's produced by my close friend and one of my top ABLE speakers, a guy called Humphrey Walters. And it's a hard-hitting book about the principles of winning. And winning is all about inches. And the reason I really fell in love with this is that I played a lot of sport in my younger years. Unbeknown to me, a lot of what I learned playing sport, I brought into my business career, particularly with teams. And rereading Humphrey's book again brought it home to me that it's teamwork. It's never one individual that gets to the winning post. It's the team that allows people to get there. Whether it's an individual sportsman, they always have a winning team behind them to enable them to get there, or whether it's a team where you've got a few star players, but those star players are only stars because of the team. And it's all about inches. And Humphrey was the secret weapon behind Clive Woodward and the team winning the World Cup in 2003, because he implemented his theory that he goes into in some detail in the Little Book of Winning about each individual making a few inches of improvement. As a collective, it has made a massive difference. So it's a great link between sport and business.
That appeals a lot to me. I've actually put that on my to-read list straight away. So thanks for the tip there. Peter, are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Now, that's going to be a little embarrassing for me because from that perspective, during lockdown in particular, I have tended to avoid the televisions in the house. One of my daughters is still at home, and my wife, and they're avid watchers of Netflix. And I've been sort of, if I go into the room, I start getting interested in these crazy seasons on TV of Netflix. And I think one of them was A Beautiful Lie, that was an Australian film about a tennis star that suddenly had an affair with a young individual and going through. I just got hooked in it, but to me, it's not something that I would really recommend, but it's very easy to get hooked on these things when other people are watching you.
And finally, Peter, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
Well, there's my website, which is www.able-academy.com. Or you're more than welcome to get in touch with me personally on 07711 669 363.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure I add these resources to the show notes. Peter, Thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
And likewise, Samir, it's been a pleasure. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my journey and my vision for the future. Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.